When I say you've been lied to, your first instinct most likely is to say, huh, how have I been lied to? I don't like this truth. Tell me, what's the lie? And the lie is that the animation that you just saw is not a hand-drawn animation. In fact, it's a geometry nodes project, obviously, because it looks mathematical. And whenever something's mathematical, you know your boy made it with geometry nodes. But this is going to be a two-part tutorial series, namely telling you how to generate this thing and how I turned it into a thing that looks like, you know, something that was drawn, because it turns out that that can also be made procedurally. So I think this is going to be a cool tutorial for two reasons. One, you're going to learn how to make this actually fairly complicated animation, and you're going to learn how to take any animation ever and turn it into a thing that looks like it was drawn by hand. So let's get into it. Hopefully you don't feel too bad about me lying to you, okay? We'll make it up by me giving you some info. So in Blender, we're going to delete the default cube, add it back in. Okay, step one, done. Now we are just going to dive into the GeoNodes, because this is going to be a raw GeoNodes project. We don't even need the cube. So what is it that we're trying to make? We're trying to make a donut, a torus, with grooves cut into it, kind of like these paths that go around it in rings, and each of those rings gets a sphere. So that's a lot to handle. So let's take it step by step by step. First thing is we need to make a donut, and if you look at the primitives, the geometry primitives, mesh primitives, you're going to see there actually is no donut. So first order of business is we got to make one procedurally, which is going to be useful anyhow. To do this, I'm going to use two curved circles, which might seem like I'm pulling it out of nowhere, but you'll understand in a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these curved circles, right? So this circle, if we were to sweep another circle around it, kind of like giving it thickness as it goes around, taking the curve and turning it into a mesh, that would make a donut, which we can control the inner, outer, and radii and the resolution of. So I'm just going to set this to 0.5. The reason for this is this radius actually matters because we're going to cut grooves into this. So it's nice to know what the radius is. But yeah, we made a donut. Next order of business is we need to cut grooves into this. The way we are going to do this is using mesh boolean. We're going to generate a bunch of meshes that kind of go along this and kind of groove-like patterns, and then we're going to subtract it away. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we first of all need to generate the paths procedurally. To do this, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the circle, and as we go along it, I want to, on each of these points, on each of these vertices, I want to generate one of these paths. Okay, and again, another leap of faith, but you'll have to trust me on this one. What we're going to do is we're going to instance on points. For every point on the circle, we want to instance another circle. We're going to be using a lot of these, so I'm just going to reuse this one over here. Sorry, I still have COVID. And you can see this almost gives us what we want, but the circles are kind of like flattened on the XY plane. We need to rotate them. So if we could rotate them to be oriented correctly, these would give our grooves. Actually, there is an argument for making another curved circle and connecting it here, and you're like, what's the difference? The difference is now we can control the number of rings we have. Either way, to orient these correctly, it turns out what you need is a function for rotation, because if you rotate them, you can see it kind of, this isn't exactly what we want. Let me make the radius a bit, well, it's going to be hard to tell unless I go in wireframe. You can see they're the right size, but they're not oriented correctly. We need to do a function for rotation. And it turns out there's a simple way to do this using the tangent function. So if I use tangent raw, you can see it's kind of trying to do the right thing. It's looking at the orientation of the curve, and it's like switching it along it. It's not what we want. All we need to do is a tiny correction, and it's always in a line Euler to vector. It should be on the z-axis. And you can see this, what it does is it looks at our original circle, being this one. It's going to compute the tangent lines, which are going to change over time. And it's going to orient it based off the z-axis, because that's how we want to rotate it, giving us this. which perfectly gives us our groove paths. And again, important to note, we can pick the number of grooves we want. So I'm going to go for 12. Or is that too dense? I don't know. I mean, we could keep it procedural. It turns out that when we're going to mesh Boolean in a second, it's going to be computationally expensive. So we're actually going to apply geometry nodes. So it is good to pick a number we want. So let's say 10. Okay, next order of business is we need to turn this into a mesh that we can use for the mesh Boolean. So same thing as last time. Curve to mesh. What profile curve? Yet another curved circle. So far we have 1, 2, 3, 4 curved circles. Are we going to have even more? We'll find out. So basically, this is the same thing as before where we made the donut, but now we're just making a bunch of donuts. So I'm just going to set the radius to 0.1. And what I want you to imagine here, so again, what is the point of creating this kind of looks like a hair scrunchie? You know what I mean? The point of this is, if I show you both of these, is we're going to cut one shape from the other, and that's going to generate the paths or the grooves. So let's do that now, and I'm going to save because this part is computationally expensive. So I'm going to call it available on Patreon, link in the description. So the way we do this is we're going to use a mesh Boolean. We want to take our original mesh, the donut, and difference, we want to subtract away, that's what difference means, the other mesh. And when we view this, it's going to take a second. You could see it kind of looks messed up, so I'm going to make it shade flat. But you can see it cuts away the paths, and because this is procedural, and again, every time I update this, it's going to take a second, we can change the number of grooves on the fly. We could even make it so that there's only like 3 grooves, and this should be less computationally expensive. But I'm going to go for 10. That doesn't look too busy, okay? And the second thing we want to do, so we've actually done most of the work already. The second thing we want to do is make spheres that go along these circles in interesting ways where they're kind of offset from each other. But before we do that, we have the mesh. Again, I'm committed to the number 10. What I'm going to do to make sure that we don't need to load this node tree every time, because again, if I bump this up to 11, it takes like a significant amount of time to do that, right? So to make this faster, hovering over GeoNodes, Control A to apply. And now this is actually a mesh, because we forget that geometry nodes is this procedural thing, but it's a modifier that we can bake in at any point, okay? So I've baked this in. Another advantage of this is we could shade smooth, and now using the normals, we can auto smooth, which is not something we could have done before, I don't think. So we can actually treat this like a mesh. And this would have been a nightmare to model. Well, not really, but whatever. It would have been a nightmare to make it procedural otherwise. So we have the first part, and the question is, how am I going to add in the spheres now? We lost all our geometry nodes progress. No, we didn't, right? We can just add in a geometry nodes modifier, make it the same one. It's going to take a second because it's basically going to delete our mesh and just kind of recreate this. Because remember, if I was to like add in a sphere and apply geonodes and make it this thing, what this geometry nodes does is it generates this mesh, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this mesh Boolean thing, and we're going to save our progress from before, but we're going to use some of these nodes. So I'm just going to delete a couple of these so that we have this thing that we made before. This is still going to be useful for us. And we can now use the group input, which gives us the original geometry. We join them together, and now we have our progress from before. So using this instance on points, we're going to instance spheres that go around the thing. So speaking of that, we don't need that. We're going to, again, keep these nodes with the tangent, all this work that we did. The only difference is instead of instancing a curved circle, what we're going to do is we're going to instance a UV sphere, a small one. In fact, we know the resolution should, or the radius should be 0.1. And we'll get to that. But right now you could see that we have spheres in the right spots, but they're not, on the rim and they're not spinning. So that's what we are going to fix. So looking at this UV sphere, What I want to do is I want to have it individually. So just for this UV spheres, I want it to go along a circle. And once we have this kind of animated sphere, this is what we are going to instance. Now, if you remember the original, if I was to add in the curve circle that I deleted, I want you to remember that the radius of this curved circle that we instanced along the thing, so this whole situation, the radius was 0.5. This is important because what we want is our sphere to go along a circle of radius 0.5. That's why I picked that number, so that we could remember it. So let's do that. Enough talk. We're going to take the sphere, we're going to add a transform node, which is going to let us move it. And what I want to do is I want to make a function, and I'm going to outsource it to a combine XYZ. I want to make a function that basically says, hey, go along a circle. For those, I don't know why I said circle so weird. I just watched Downton Abbey, which I didn't think would be a movie I would like because I didn't see the TV show or whatever. Pretty fucking good movie. I really liked it. I thought it was just, I don't like period pieces, but it was good. What's the point? I said some word weird. We need to make a function that makes this go in a circle. If you took trig, you're going to know that's your sines and a cosine. So we're going to animate this over time. So right now, this is just going to move on the x-axis. I don't want that. I want it to move in a cyclic fashion. So this is going to be a sine or a cosine. It doesn't matter. So now with the cosine, it's going to go back and forth forever. We do that on both axes. One of them gets a sine. And now it's going along a circle. By the way, to make this move faster, we just multiply how fast time's acting. So there we go. It's going along a circle. Now remember, this is not going to be correct because if we take this and we instance it and we view it, you can see it's starting to get, by the way, the reason this is delayed and like each sphere looks like it's coming a bit after the other, which looks good, is because of this tangent rotation function that we have here, which is good. It's a good consequence. But you can see it's kind of hovering above the torus instead of going on the rails that we made. Remember, the original radius of the transformation of the circle should be 0.5, not 1. So quick correction, I'm just going to vector math, take this whole thing and scale it by a half. So now it's moving a bit closer. And you can see it's doing the correct thing. Of course, the sphere is too big. And if I remember correctly, 0.1 was the number we used to generate the grooves. So 0.1 should be the largest number we can pick. Of course, you can go a tiny bit smaller and have these tiny spheres, but then they'll hover. So 0.1. And let's also shade smooth these. So there we go. And again, this is a geometry nodes modifier at this point. So if we rotate this, it's still going to work, which is kind of cool. So there we go. That's part 1 of this tutorial series. Part 2 is going to be how to make anything look like we drew it. But this is how we generate the animation that I made. So let's wrap this boy up. We made it. We made it in under 15 minutes. Not bad. We'll see if it's going to be... nope, that's the wrong one. Big cam. We'll see if it's going to be under 15 minutes after I do this part. So thank you for watching the tutorial. As always, I like to pimp the ever-living shit out of Patreon at the end of this. So listen up. If you click the link in the description, you can join a hierarchy of nearly 800 people. They are large-brained, no smooth brain over there. Large-brained individuals that are directly supporting what I do here and on the CG Matter channel. You get 3 benefits for becoming a patron that I think are worth your while. The first one, early access to tutorials. You could have seen this tutorial multiple days early because of a bit of a backlog. Patrons get to see tutorials before they come out. They get to comment, view, gain the knowledge. They don't have to wait. And that's just for $1. Second tier is you get the blend file. So for example, the drawn torus thing that we're making, you can just download the blend file for that. You don't need to make it yourself, and you can like look through it, explore. There are hundreds of blend and project files I've uploaded on Patreon, and you could just get access to those immediately. And thirdly, exclusive tutorials. There's a bit of a catalog, somewhere between 12 and 20 tutorials, usually geometry nodes, that you could watch. and those are paywalled, but I try to make most of my tutorials available for free. So there you go. If any of that interests you, there's a link in the description. You can become part of the patronage hood. And yeah, thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something, and I will come back with part 2 pretty soon.